first time ever.
Hear you loud and clearly.
And it was going place.
That stuff's great.
But the game is not a roguelike.
Boomer shooter.
Bang.
Hello, this is John St. John, and you're listening to KEEP in the Keep, bringing you all the hits from the finest in the world of gaming and entertainment. Now sit back and relax as the drowned god Cthulhu lulls your mind with the tastiest talk in town.
Welcome to another chapter of In the Keep podcast. I'm your very own prophet of the drowned god, the Motherlode. The Keep is a collective of gaming enthusiasts compelled by the drowned god Cthulhu to frag and jib one another into oblivion for all eternity.
Hi, my name is Carlos. Some of you might know me as Revel. I'm a Los Angeles-based music producer, creative director, project lead, and as of late, a video game developer, which has been an interesting turn in my life. I'm pretty new to the game dev side of things, but I've been doing music for how old am I now? I want to say like 13 years at this point. 13, 14 years. In a professional capacity, maybe like 7 or 8.
So, like, what are tacos like in LA? Because I hear they're like better.
Oh my God. I know you're joking, but you do not want to start the taco conversation with me. Because I was born in San Diego, but I spent a big portion of my life in Tijuana, Mexico. My whole family's Mexican, and I think Los Angeles Mexican food, and I'm probably going to get so much hate mail for this, is baloney. It is not good.
I live in the Sonoran Desert, man. I know what tacos are supposed to taste like.
Yeah. There's 2 places out here that I think are all right. But they're all right because the people that came over to make these places are originally from Mexico. They're from Tijuana or from somewhere else in the Republic, and they were chefs out there, or they made tacos out there. Whereas a lot of the time, the people that come out here and have taco places weren't, they just kind of decided to do that because it's like, fuck, well, I got to make some money somehow, right? And no hate to the hustle either. I just, I'm a snob with tacos. That's about it. That's that's where my snobbery ends. It's with tacos.
I know you're a culinary expert and all, but I think you should understand this then, that tacos or just any food really, it's just better when somebody's abuela or my mama makes it for me instead of going and buying it at a store.
Yeah.
And at least here, like the mom and pop places are where you go to buy Mexican food. You don't like go to fucking Guadalajara 5-star Mexican bistro or whatever. You go to like the fucking taco stand that's open on the side of the street in the middle of the night.
Yeah. No, 100%, man. Like it's like Mexican culinary culture. There's a lot of incredible dining experiences out in Mexico that you can have that are like, will rival anything from a Michelin star restaurant when it comes to fine dining. Mm-hmm. But when it comes down to like street food or like homemade meals and stuff like that, I mean, everything about Mexican cuisine is very centered around like fresh ingredients and like old recipes that are passed down, and very simple foods that are heavy and heavily rooted in the culture of the native peoples of South America. And so it does make a massive difference to have someone make it for you fresh on the spot. Like my litmus test for whether or not a Mexican place is going to be all right is if I walk in there and I don't see someone that looks like my grandma in the back, like pressing down some tortillas like this. No way. I'm out. Like if those things are made fresh, it's like, it's such a important aspect of that food, and I can get into a myriad of reasons why. One of them being that like a tortilla that's made out of corn is not gonna last very long. It has a very short shelf life. And so what people do to make sure that you can distribute it to stores and stuff like that is they add a bunch of crap into it that just ruins the flavor and the texture of something that could be really sweet and just very light and fluffy, and in turn it turns into this weird floppy breaky mess that tastes like lime too much, and you're kind of like, what the this is not a tortilla, man. Which is actually the history as to why you know, hard shell tacos are a thing. It's because
I would assume because they can be distributed. Like,
yeah, exactly. They had to deep fry them. That was the only way that the American palate could kind of like become receptive to that and not become a logistical issue to have to like make those fresh at every one of your locations.
So I grew up in like South Alabama, and for the vast majority of my life, only ever had South Alabama Mexican food, which was, you know, you would be like, what? If you
It's
saw
something like California pizza, I can imagine.
like barbecue fries and like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Which is all very don't get me wrong, it is good food. It is just like this extremely different thing from, you know, what it's being marketed as.
Oh yeah, fuck yeah, man! Like that's another thing too. It's like I have had Tex-Mex or like, you know, like Americanized Mexican food, and like even though I don't consider it authentic, it's fucking delicious.
Yeah,
it's good. It's great. It's just not, you know, it's just not Mexican food. Like, you know, like I'll have some shit from a can and it'll be pretty all right, right? Or I'll go to like a Tex-Mex place somewhere in Texas or something, and like, despite the fact that it has nothing to do with anything I've ever had in Mexico, it's awesome. It's delicious. It's a fusion of flavors and things that are unique and you can't really find anywhere else. And I consider it its own thing. And I'm not going to be a purist about that. But the problem is when you go somewhere out here that's like, oh yeah, best tacos in LA, super authentic. You show up and they're like serving you Mission tortillas from the store and like ground beef. And you're like, what?
Here's a pound of fucking sour cream, baby. Knock
It's
yourself
like,
out.
get that shit off my taco. Unless it's a Tex-Mex place, then please, all the crema, everything, all of it.
Give me everything. I know that was like one of the things when I first moved out to Arizona, because I went from Alabama to like California and I'd had stuff there, and then I ended up here. And the first time somebody showed me like a Sonoran dog, I was like, whoa. Oh, this is a whole different thing. Like they've got everything, man. But I think that a lot of you know, your typical middle America person thinks of Mexico as like just this one big homogenous thing. And, you know, the food in Baja is different than the food in like Chihuahua or whatever. Like it's just
100%. It's just like America.
Just as diverse.
It's like how you have food in the north of the U.S., right? And from the cities, and then you have Southern barbecue. It's the exact same thing in Mexico, because Mexico is not just comprised of like Spanish immigrants and native peoples that kind of like, you know, like, oh, that's a Mexican. No, it's years and years and years of like a cultural melting pot that happened in America also happened in Mexico. You know, when the Second World War happened, and before that with all the wars in Europe, because, you know, for a long time, that's the history of Europe. It's like every couple of years, it's like, all right, you want to start shooting each other? Yeah, that sounds about great. And so people would flee. And we get the story that they all went to the United States, but that's not at all the case. A lot of them went into Mexico. We have in Mexico a giant, diverse range of cultures whose culinary sort of roots became part of ours, right? Like there's something known as the al pastor taco, right? You've ever had that?
Oh,
the one on the spits?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, that is because of Lebanese immigrants to Mexico. They came from the Middle East, and then if you go to the south of Mexico where they typically landed, you don't ask for al pastor tacos. You ask for tacos al árabe, which means tacos from the Arabic
tacos, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, that spits, that's the same thing you go get at a kebab place, is just Mexicanized and turned into a taco, right?
It's actually interesting just in general how Arab Spanish really is, like Spanish culture in general really is, because I don't think people realize like quite how similar the two languages are. And I've studied both pretty extensively, and it's weird. And it's all, I believe was it the Ottomans that kind of took over Spain at one point?
It was caliphs from the north of Africa that for I think 300 years, and like I'm a big history buff too, so I just am awful with numbers and dates and shit like that in general. I can give you rough estimates as to when stuff happened and how it happened, but I can't tell you like when. But for a decent amount of time, we the Spanish peninsula that almost extended all the way up to the north, but mostly the south, like places like Madrid and Barcelona, were part of a Moorish caliphate. And so the language of Spanish became intertwined with a lot of the linguistic characteristics of the Arab language. Like, there's so many loan words that we have in Spanish. Like anything that's A-L,
Yep.
that's Arabic. Almohada, azúcar, that's the Arabic word for sugar. And, algodón, which is cotton. And there's so many more that I could probably sit here for an hour and list them. But like at the same time, it infiltrated Spanish culture. And so when you listen to like traditional Spanish music, right? Those sort of like melodic takes, those rhythms, everything about like flamenco, for example, sounds super Arabic. The way that the Spanish sing, right? It's got those same kind of notations that are like definitely culturally inherited from their time as part of the greater Moorish Empire at the time. But that in turn also then got shipped over when, after the reclamation of Spain and whatever. And then, you had the conquistadors in the Americas, like a lot of that culture seeped over here. And then you had an entire second wave of immigrants from the Middle East that came into some, like, places like Mexico or places like Chile or Argentina. And it was like a whole different wave of that same culture, like reestablishing itself. Down to the fact that like a lot of my friends down in San Diego when I was growing up were Arabs, right? They were from the Middle East, and we've realized how much we had in common really early on, down to even like physical appearances, right? It's crazy. It's really crazy how much the Middle East influenced like sort of Hispanic Latin culture, and for the better too. Our spices, our palates, they're so similar. They're so similar. And even down to our family, like, a lot of the things that we enjoy are very Mediterranean in nature, right? From the music to the food to that kind of experience. Like some of our favorite places to go are from the Middle East, right? Or, some of our favorite music to listen to is Middle Eastern in origin, at least somewhat. And it just goes to show how much overlap happened and how much it still influences like Latin culture to this day.
I mean, even the way that Spain or like proper Spanish, I should say, and that goes all the way around to every Spanish speaking country at this point. Mm-hmm. But you can tell the differentiation between how they take pronouns in Latin and, or what was kind of influenced by Latin in general, but it is very distinctly in the Arabic style. It's very different than French or even Portuguese to a certain extent. And one of my favorite teachers, his name was Ibrahim. Right, this is when I lived in Monterey, and he was a Kurdish guy, so like northeastern Iraq, and he was living in California, and he spoke perfect Spanish. So like he had a whole bunch of people thinking he was Mexican, like for real. They just believe, they're like, oh fuck yeah, there's Ibrahim. Yeah, I don't know why his name's called that, but he sure as shit is Mexican. We all know that. And he would laugh his ass off as like people just thought this. And he was like kind of a shorter, rounder guy for an Arab too. I don't know like enough about the difference between Kurds and, because I think they kind of consider themselves ethnically distinct to a certain extent, but yeah, he just like, you totally would have believed him. You'd never known the difference if I didn't just know where he was from because he was my teacher.
Oh yeah, 100%. Even here in LA, when I first moved up here, like a lot of my friends down in San Diego, we always considered ourselves to be very Mexican, but by nature, we're first generation immigrants for the most part, or the sons of first generation immigrants, and as a result, like we interacted with each other, and we're like, okay, yeah, like this is who we are culturally. And then I came to live in LA, and the first thing that happens when I try to go get tacos on like the corner somewhere in Koreatown, because that's where I was living when I first came up here, is I get two dudes in front of me start talking shit about me. Because at the time I had a buzz cut, and I'm pretty fair skinned, and I'm like 6'4", and I don't look the part too often, right? and they were talking shit about me. And it's like, oh, that's the way, like, which is like, you know, they said all kinds of shit that I'm not going to get into. And I was perplexed for a second. I'm like, these guys are really talking about me, right? And one of the things they mentioned is like, oh, he looks like he's from the Middle East, basically. They said I looked like I was an Armenian. And
I can see that. If you told me you were Armenian, I'm going to be like, okay, he's Armenian.
Yeah, and so then I replied to them in like perfect Spanish, and they're like, "Oh, what the fuck?" And I'm like, "Yeah, dude, I was actually, you know, I'm from Mexico proper, you know, like my whole family is Mexican," and it took them as a shock, and it took me as a shock, and then I started to realize, like, as it happened more and more often, where people are like, "Oh, are you Middle Eastern?" You know, or someone would come up to me when I'm at a shawarma place or whatever, and they start talking to me in Arabic, and I'm like, "Wait, hold up, no, that's, you know." I'm not from the Middle East, but you know, there's that kind of overlap. You know, it just goes to show that even what you're saying affects a lot of us, that we don't even realize it until we're exposed to that culture in a more broader sense, right?
I mean, it's kind of like a nasty thing. It can be, but it could also be like just really funny and like innocent. You know, like
yeah, exactly.
I remember when I was a little kid and I went to that same Mexican place in town that served barbecue fries, and there was this guy there who always played the guitar. Like he was just always out there, and he would sing like country tunes and whatever. And I remember walking up to him, I was like, so, like I was genuinely a curious little boy. Like I was not a piece of shit. I was just like, what part of Mexico are you from? And he's just like, the Philippines. And I was like, oh yeah. And then I realized everybody in that restaurant, that everybody in my town thought were the Mexican family who owned the Mexican joint, were all Filipino. Like, yeah. And that was just kind of how they were getting by. I was like, shit. But yeah. I learned something that day.
Yeah, that they were also conquered by the Spanish. And and they have some of the same cultural overlap. And a lot of people, it's the same thing. It's happened to me where like I go somewhere and I meet someone and I start talking to them in Spanish and they're like, wait, no, I'm Filipino. I'm like, oh, wait, okay, that makes perfect sense. You know,
my favorite one was my friend Yesway. We went to a sushi restaurant and sat down, and she just started speaking to the waitress in Japanese because she is Japanese, and the waitress is like, "Oh, I'm Korean," and I was like, "Oh, I guess you just fucked yourself there."
Yeah, I mean, it just goes to show how sharp cultural barriers can be in between peoples who look very similar and may act very similar, right? And how diverse we can be yet so similar.
Mm-hmm.
And it's happened to me so many times out here as I've moved to a far more diverse city in Los Angeles, that it's great. Like, it's such a sharp difference from like growing up in Chula Vista down in San Diego, and like pretty much you went to high school and it's like everyone there was like a Mexican immigrant, right? It was just an extension of that. And all my buds were from Mexico, and we all hang out with each other. And then you come up here and it's suddenly like, oh, there's a lot of that still, but there's so much more. And, like some of my best friends now are kind of like, they come from all walks of life. And it's been an absolute like joy to experience that side of things by moving to the city. And that's one of the few positive things that have happened because of moving to LA. God,
so,
like,
other than the shitty tacos, what made you settle down in LA?
Well, I mean, it had gotten to the point so like I said, I'm a musician, I'm a music producer. And for a long time I had been fighting the idea of having to live up here. But then a lot of the work that I was starting to do was more and more increasingly becoming in person or, relationship based. And I was having to drive up here like once a week, once every 2 weeks. And that drive, if you have to, like, unless you're leaving in the middle of the night, it is a brutal, slow traffic and just jagoffs cutting you off. And it's just, oh my God, I couldn't stand it anymore. I was
it's almost as bad as Atlanta. Almost.
Yeah. Oh my God. I don't know enough about the traffic in Atlanta to really make the comparison, but all I know is that is by far my least favorite part about this damn city. And I was like, how about I just move up here and like cut out the middleman? And I just like, if most of my work is happening in LA and a lot of the things that I want to do are centered in LA between shows, promoters, record labels, executives, parties, stuff like that. Like, I don't want to make that trek anymore. I feel like it's going to be more important for me to live up here if I want to keep doing things in that avenue. So I made the decision in like 2017, I think, and I just packed my shit. I drove up here, and the rest was history. But like I said, it's a great experience. It's a fast moving city. But as the years went by, I found myself moving more north and north and north to get away from the shit, you know? Like, it was one thing to move up here, and in my head, I was like, yeah, I'll just move into the damn center of the city and live there and, you know, be a part of the fast moving culture and everything.
Just be poor for the rest of my life.
Yeah. And then I was like, okay, maybe that's not the most ideal situation, right? And then as time went on, I kept moving like a little bit more up north or a little bit further up and up and up. And now at this point, I pretty much live like 3 streets down from like the most northern part of LA. like up a mountain in this place called La Cañada. And it's just like, if I have to go to downtown LA, then I will drive there. It'll take me 20 minutes, but I am not going to suffer that shit anymore. It was not great. And to anyone who's thinking of moving to LA, do not make my mistake. You can live anywhere in the city. Just don't live in downtown. It's not worth it. It's really not worth it.
Especially now, man. It's it's dead. Everything's just been shut down. Like, the last time I was in Los Angeles was probably like 2017, somewhere along those lines. And I wanted to get, like, I've got a night to stay here. I'm going to get the full experience. So like, I rented a hotel on Hollywood Boulevard, which was a huge mistake. And then I ended up walking through Thai Town all the way to like the Comedy Store. And and there was like a Disney was like debuting some new movie with The Rock in the middle of the street. And I'm like, fuck this. I would never live here. Not like, I felt the same. I just don't like cities. That's what it really comes down to. I appreciate like the intermingling of culture and commerce and everything, but I was born in the country, and that is where I will retire. Like,
yeah, I it's more out of convenience that I live up here, and I totally understand what you're saying. Like, I live out here because I have to, like, but like I said, I now live in a place that's so not Los Angeles. It's basically, it's basically like 10 or 15 minutes from JPL, and the community was founded by JPL scientists and their wives, and they all became retirees, and these houses were built in like the 50s and before that even. And it's a community that's just full of very old people, and it's very calm, and it's really peaceful. And it's just like, it's almost like a suburb, but it's not. And it's still, if I want to get that experience, I can drive through it, but I'm not in the shits anymore, which has been so good for my mental health, right? Like, I can go outside in the middle of the night and just look up at the stars and actually be able to see them. And it's peaceful and it's quiet, and I don't hear a car or gunshots or some shit, or fucking police cars or anything. It's just it's so nice, and it's more akin to what I'm used to. Like, San Diego's also a big city, but where I grew up was very, very down south, like 10 minutes from the border. We would just drive there, cross, go eat, and come back. Like, it was a much more quiet, settled down place versus when I first moved up here, and I'm like, yeah, let's go straight to downtown and let's live there. It was jarring, and like exactly like you said, like, I appreciate it, but I have come to find that it is overwhelming and not for me. And in many respects, the pandemic, as terrible as it's been, has been pretty easily navigable from my side of things, just because I'm like what I like to call an introverted extrovert. I can pretend like I'm very sociable and everything's okay, but I just want to sit on a computer for 12 hours and like work and do things in there and exist in that, right? But a lot of my work by nature requires like what's considered to be like a type A personality. So it's like you have to kind of like get good at doing that kind of shit. And I like to pretend as if though I've gotten half decent at it, right? But in that respect, the pandemic allowed me to pretty much like hedge my chips and be like, hey, we need you to do like some album work for this person. And it's like, oh, we're going to rent the studio at this time. I was like, listen, I'm not comfortable, being around people. How about I do that work from home? And you guys don't have to rent the studio and you can pay me my same fee. You'll save money. Oh, that sounds good. Okay, yeah, that's reasonable. Thank you, Carlos. And I'm like, yep, that's why I'm doing that. No other reason. I'm being considerate.
I can't even. I'm trying to find a way to put this into words that doesn't make me sound crazy, but fuck it, I'll just sound crazy. I think that creativity is sort of like an energy, like a radio wave that, people have different ways of tuning into it. Like you have a radio, interceptor in your head, a receptor. And for me, mine works best, when I'm alone, when there's not a bunch of other waves coming through, like other people talking or like whatever. And I'm good at conversations and in situations where it's like, one, maybe two or three other people, like small groups. But when there's a lot, like I couldn't be less happy in like a dance club or something like that if I can't hear the other person speaking to me or feel like I'm being heard. And so, yeah, like creative energy really flows for me when I'm alone. Yeah. And I think and for you, it's probably I think that's why I resonate with game devs so much, is because you're kind of always having to put yourself in that situation.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I started doing game stuff before I even started getting into music. Music just resonated that same chord. It's all creative expression, all of it. Everything that I really am passionate about in my life is some form of creative expression. I love to cook. And I found a lot of the similarities from cooking are from music. It's the same core principles that apply to that form of expression also apply here. And in game dev stuff, the reason I started making music is because years ago, when I was a little kid, like I was making mods for Halo C. You ever hear of Halo C? Halo Custom Edition?
Fuck no. This is the first time I've ever heard of that.
Ooh, all right. Well, get ready. Pack in. How much time you got?
We're only 26 minutes in. So
all right, I got you.
We got plenty.
Like I was saying, Halo C is Halo Combat Evolved, but there was also a lesser known package that came out for the PC with the PC port that Gearbox Software made in like 2001 or 2002, 2003, 2004, somewhere in that general range. I just don't remember anymore. Called Halo Custom Edition. And Halo Custom Edition basically allowed you, as they packaged it, to just use the exact same tool set that Bungie used to make Halo. Just they had gutted a lot of the functionality to only allow you to make maps, right? And Halo Custom Edition was a very interesting, to say the least, way of packaging a mod support environment. It like the way you made content for that game was not like anything else that I've ever seen. And I could be completely wrong. Maybe it's due to inexperience, but like for the most part, I've come to learn as the years have gone by that, if you're making a mod for something, it's usually some sort of Quake based engine in some extent, right? It comes packaged with the level editor, or the level editors are brush based and they're like their own little suite. Unreal Engine games, it's a similar process. For this game, you had to basically use 3ds Max, or like the free version of 3ds Max that existed way back then called Gmax. That was kind of like a Quake 3 thing or some shit like that. I can't even remember. And you had to pretend like you were making maps for Halo as a BSP, and BSPs are very finicky about what they allow. And so essentially you were being forced to make a very limited level that conformed to very strict rules in a very freeform environment, and in a way that wasn't typical of anything else out there at the time, as far as I know. And that is honestly something that I look at now and I'm like, thank God that I got into this thing, because it taught me how to use some of the most abrasive and like industry leading software, like, Photoshop and 3ds Max and Maya, things that are typically you're going to have to go to school to understand, right? But this community was using these tools to make maps for this game, and you ended up learning software that became invaluable for whatever career you were doing if you were doing something creative. And as time went on, sort of like this community figured out how to unlock all like the tools and stuff like that. So you ended up being able to make like custom vehicles or custom weapons or custom like player models or custom HUDs, stuff like that. Like basically anything that wasn't the engine was exposed to you after they figured that shit out. And you end up learning a lot of different skill sets doing that. Like for me, like I was a little kid, dude. I was like 11, 12, something like that. And I had figured out how to animate in 3ds Max, right? And how to, paint textures with Photoshop, and how to eventually, realizing that if you make a reload animation, the sound isn't going to be in sync, modify audio. And then that opened a whole different door to like, kind of like realizing like, oh, that if I take this piece of audio and I loop it a couple times, it may be like a ka-chink from like a fucking gun reloading, but it has a rhythm. It's like, and then that kind of awoke something in me. I'm like, okay. And then I just started taking like different gun sounds and like making beats with them. And then I grabbed a Daft Punk song. I'll never forget this. And I threw it in there, and it was Face to Face by Daft Punk. And that song, I think, just starts with a kick.
Yep. And
then I realized like that looks like something. That shape, it looks like a little, like a candy corn. And it's just on its side. Is that what a kick sound is? And I grabbed that and I just looped it. And I realized that the closer that I looped it to each other, like the faster the tempo was. In that, it was over at that point. Like I stopped giving a shit about modding games after that. And I kind of discovered music. But the thing that got me there was video games. And then eventually it all kind of came full circle in a different way when I was touring a different project. And when it came down to like, okay, you have to do live visuals, right? We can hire this guy to do them for you. And I'm like, okay, what are they going to do? And I saw a lot of their work and it was just 3D crap. And I'm like, wait, wait, hold up. I know how to do this. And then it started with me making my own visuals. And then eventually it got to a point that I was touring with the computer, a laptop that was running a build of Half-Life 2 that I had modded, that essentially was just a freeform camera. And I had built this environment like out of like brush shapes and stuff like that. And like, that was my visuals, right? I was up there DJing and stuff. And then I had like an Xbox controller next to me, and I was just kind of like flying around and panning the camera. And I knew if I flew into this room, like, an explosion would happen, and I could time that with the drop of a song. And it was like this whole like VJ DJ setup that I had going on that, eventually reawoke my passion when it came to that kind of like graphic and 3D design sort of things. And a few years removed from that, like I was doing a lot of projects for artists that were very involved in just that side instead of like making music for them. And then eventually it all truly came full circle with Sprawl. Like that, like I realized when the pandemic hit, I was like, I have two options: sit here and pretend like everything's okay, or do something, and do something that's going to be a form of creative expression. Just to kind of circle back on what we were talking about earlier, because I really feel like creatives are just in the same way, like just in the same way that like an average person needs to take a shit, we need to create, or else we get backed up, Like,
I gotta do both, at the same time a lot.
At the same time. Oh shit, you're multitasking at that point. But yeah, like, I mean, what I'm trying to say is that like, we get pent up. We have to be making something. And then when coronavirus hit, it's like I had just played 3 great sold out shows here in LA. Like there was tours in the works, all kinds of crap that was awesome. And we were looking so forward to doing that. And then, it kind of all just stopped. And I was still getting work, just doing production work for other people. But you're working for someone else. It's not your vision. And even when it is, you're kind of restricted to playing ball with someone else. Whereas this, I wanted to do something that was truly just me and was about merging these two worlds, right? The music and and you know, an interactive experience. And that's kind of like the foundation of where Sprawl came from, at least from my side of things. And then Hannah has her story as well. And to those of you who don't know, Hannah is my co-developer, incredible programmer, brilliant mind. And she, independently of me, had started doing her own project, and we kind of just found each other and, you know, ended up where we're at now.
For the way you put it, it's like Hannah, you know, does all the work and then you just take shits. And
Yeah, 100%. I take creative shits. That's what I do.
That's exactly how In the Keep works. It's like I have Gelmo-san just doing all the real stuff, and then I just take credit for it.
Yeah, I mean, to say the least, it's like we complement each other very, very well. Like a lot of the things that I'm not good at, she's incredible at. A lot of the things that she's not good at, I can do. In Sprawl, I'm doing, you know, all the level design, all the art, all the character design, all, you know, the texturing, the modeling, the animating, the weapons, all the sound design, all the music. I have complete creative control over that. And then she handles all the nitty gritty of like, let's make this a real thing. Like, you know, like we come up with ideas for how the game works, the functionality, you know, the game loop in and of itself. And then she basically brings it to life. Right. And in a sense, like, I mean, before I even knew her, like I tried to work on this game, like as a Dark Places mod, kind of like Wrath. Right.
Yep.
Did you ever see that by any chance? Did you ever know about that? It's like the lore at the bottom of the iceberg for Sprawl, the Dark Places version.
I mean, I've had the benefit of hearing you being interviewed before, so I got the gist of the story.
Right.
But I never saw that version of Sprawl.
I think I'm gonna do what like Dust did and like kind of package it like hidden somewhere in a subfolder and not tell anyone. You know, like those first 3 levels and all that. It's a cool experience, but it's just so much. It's far removed from what it is now, to say the least.
I mean, there's so many examples of that where you see something start off in a certain way and then you see it again. It's like when you go back and have you ever seen the documentary that was like, I think it was packaged with the original trilogy maybe like 20 years ago or something. I still have it somewhere, but they made Star Wars and then they're like, this sucks. And then they just didn't ship that and made Star Wars again.
Yeah. They saved it in the edit. It was George Lucas's wife, right?
And I mean, they literally filmed the whole movie and then went back and filmed the whole movie again. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's wild. And then, you know, you have to save it with the edit too, because that was like the perfect storm for George Lucas. Cause he's, you know, he's one of these people that just has like creative diarrhea and he can't stop. And it just, like just the limitations of the budget and the time and the, you know, the medium for him in the 70s was perfect to get him to just quit when he had to and make the best thing he could. And then that ended up being, you know, one of the greatest media franchises of all time.
Right.
Where was I going with that? No, seeing the, you know, the way that things start to where they finish, I think can be hugely, hugely informative about, you know, when someone's looking at what you do and they're like, well, I could never do that. But then you show them like, well, this is where I started. Like,
yeah.
Oh, well, I can make that garbage. Yeah.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. I mean, like that's something that I preach to everyone. Like you, if you're a creative person and you want to create something, you will find a way to do it. I had a history from a modding community from when I was a kid, but I had never worked in games before. I've never done anything like this before, but I'm damn stubborn. And you can ask anyone around me and they'll tell you I'm fucking stubborn. Like I will you know, like I will sit down and I'm going to power through something until I figure it out. And that's in essence what Sprawl was, right? Like, I mean, I started on Dark Places, then I met Hannah, and then, you know, she convinced me to switch over to Unreal Engine, just to paraphrase a very long process. And then I'm sitting there staring at Unreal Engine and I'm like, I don't know how the fuck to use this thing. Like this is completely foreign to me. And then I sat down and I figured it out. Like, you know, so I'm convinced that there's so many people out there that could make incredible experiences that just don't realize that if they just put in the time to do so, they totally fucking can. Like, it's like I'm super, like I said, and even in the past podcast with Dump Truck, it was like I can't wait to see more musicians explore this side of things as well, because their creativity is going to lend itself to create incredible, new, innovative experiences that I cannot, I think is much needed in a space that feels like it's starting to stagnate a little. Fresh blood is always great. And one example I brought up was like someone like Marky Music, right? Who I listen to his tunes and I'm like, this is great fucking shit. And it's so diverse. Like, I wonder what his game would look like. Right. And I've played his levels in Quake and they're great. He understands level design. And it's like, you're like one step removed from doing that kind of shit. And I'm sure at some point he probably will, and it's going to be awesome. But and then I see that and I become curious about other people, right? Like people in my circle that are producers or graphic designers or whatever. It's like, what, creative directors, etc. Like what would your game look like? Right. And maybe it's necessarily not something that you want to do, but if it is something that you want to do, what's stopping you?
Michael Markey is one of those rare individuals who, some people are like, born with some talent, like an affinity towards something. And he's like brute force, just creative. And I feel like
that's me.
Anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything that I mean, we can say but like we're both trying to talk about ourselves. But anything that he wants to do, anything that he decides he's going to put his time into, he will be equally as successful at it. Like that's just kind of who he is. It's not, if he didn't become a musician, he was going to become something else.
Totally.
And, and he's already working in the industry as a mapper now, like not just as a musician.
Yeah.
Which makes him so unbelievably hireable. Like,
oh, dude. I mean, that's sort of what I'm banking on too. I mean, like jack of all trades that's decent at all of them, which is probably very appealing. And it's also the fact that like you can kind of get that impression just by like looking at the guy or talking to him one or two times. Like I have no relationship with him besides having a conversation at one point, and I'm like, I get the gist that you've got some similarities to me that I maybe haven't really. I don't have any reason to believe besides the fact that it's just a gut feeling, right? And you saying that out loud is kind of like, yeah, I knew it. I knew that. I knew that shit. But you also mentioned that you share that similarity, right? That desire to want to do shit and like brute force and just kind of like, I'm going to fucking figure this out. I don't care how I do it.
That was like one of the things that my mom, would always tell me is like, nobody could ever tell you no. Like if you made up your mind you were going to do something, you were going to do it. And that is pretty much how I operate. And I'm not saying that like, it's not even necessarily always a good trait to have. It can take me down some really, really dark paths.
I got you.
Put you in therapy for a while, but I'm just that way. And I think you're absolutely correct. Like you're very, very similar, at least from what I can tell so far. Like you made up your mind you were going to make this game, and God damn it, you're going to do it no matter what it takes.
Yeah.
And it pisses me off. Like, I mean, I have no interest in being a level designer, right? Like that's just like, that's not something I want to do. And I'll say that like, oh, I can't do that. And people will always respond like, well, you could if you wanted to. I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to.
Right.
But if I did want to, I'm 100% confident I would do it, and like it wouldn't be a problem. But I could say the same thing about like podcasting. Or I never thought for one moment that I would be, doing this. This is not a career path that I ever envisioned for myself until I was, probably in my early 20s. I did a small podcast that no one will ever hear that was mostly about like pro wrestling, and but like I couldn't get that out of my even though I didn't do that, like I had to go do other shit with my life for a while. I knew I was going to come back to podcasting at some point. And when I found it I found like, oh, this is my motivation to do that. I made up my mind and now I'm just going to do it. And you're not going to tell me otherwise. And that could be anything, man. Like for you. Yeah. If somebody had told you when you were like 9 years old, like you're never going to be a musician, you still would have done it.
100%. It's also
sometimes that's the best motivation.
yeah, of course. It's hilarious. If someone tells you you can't do something, it's like, fuck you. Now I really want to do it, right? Like,
now I'm really good. I'm going to do it harder.
yeah. And the amount of, and it was funny because what got me into, music and stuff like that was the fact that I was making dance music at a time where dance music wasn't yet popular in America. It was this weird fucking niche thing. And obviously that has completely changed as of late. Right. Or even back then. But I got my start doing that kind of crap, like in a time where it wasn't popular and where the people around me saw me like really enjoying that kind of style of stuff and like, starting to experiment with it. And they're like, that's crap. That's bullshit. You're not that's nothing. And I'm like, all right, bet. 4 years later, I'm on a tour bus and I'm everywhere across America. And like, I'm playing shows with some of the greatest people. Just fucking my one of my greatest accomplishments with that thing was we did a sold out show in San Diego in my hometown at one of the biggest stadiums there, and like that was an incredible thing to be a part of, to really see all the same people in the crowd that were telling me you're never going to be able to do it, like cheering my name. Like I was like, yeah, that's right, fuck you. And that is such an incredible motivating factor, right? And even with Sprawl, it's like, it's one of those things where I've learned to weaponize that in such a way to motivate me that it feels like it makes you unstoppable. And I'm sure there's been plenty of people in your life that have told you can't do something, and then you desire it even more than ever.
I mean, if you just draw a line in the sand and say you will not cross that line, I can't help it. That like it's basically like you forced me to.
Okay, that's good to keep in mind next time I'm in Arizona and invite you out to drink.
As soon as my mom was like, like you can't say this word, it's a bad word. I'm like, oh, now I'm definitely gonna say it. Like
it's my fucking favorite word. My entire personality is now based around that word.
Yes, exactly.
That's funny enough because I feel like your mom and my mom would probably sit down and talk and be like, "Did we raise the same kid?"
Probably, man.
Well, my kid just said the word shit over and over again for like 3 years. I'm like, okay, that's similar.
Well, it's like a breaking point because when I was really, really young, I was very much like a timid kind of like afraid to break the rules kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
And once that barrier got broken for the first time, I was like, oh, there's no consequences. Yes.
Oh,
like,
fuck.
What are you going to do? Like,
yeah, I fucking got you, man. Like literally word for word. That's a similar upbringing. That's something I could fucking relate to. The same thing. I was a shy little kid, and then you fuck one thing up, and you realize like, I didn't die. They told me I couldn't do this, and I'm doing it now. So why doesn't this just apply to everything? And then you just immediately stick a fork into the wall socket, and you're like, okay. Maybe there's some shit I shouldn't be doing.
Yeah. It only takes one time to get ran over by a golf cart on a skateboard to learn not to do that again. Like,
it's the school of hard knocks, Yeah. It's also not entirely true. Like a lot of the things I've been very fortunate to be blessed with, like a desire to read and ingest other people's experiences and an ability to learn from them without me necessarily having to go through it. Right. Whereas I feel like a lot of people in my life that I've known or I've grown up with, it's like, dude, like you need to just go through the school of hard knocks. You're just not going to listen to what anyone tells you. Right. Like it's one thing to someone try to stifle your creativity or like try to prevent you from doing something that you really want to do passionately. It's something else from someone telling you like, don't jump off that cliff, dude. You're going to break your back, and being like, fuck you. And then they're in a wheelchair.
But
like
for those people, for every 100 of those people, like one of them ends up being one of those wingsuit guys, and you're like, well, fuck.
Yeah, 100%.
How many people told the Wright brothers like that's never gonna work?
Yeah. But I consider that in a completely different realm from like someone who is actively doing things that are damaging to the people around them, right? Or are damaging to their well-being in a way that isn't like, like the Wright brothers and the Wright sister, who's, the primary reason why they even stayed in that shit.
The Wrights.
Yeah. You have you ever seen that story? Like,
No, I'm interested now. I didn't realize.
I highly recommend it. I feel like you're into like history just as much as I am, and like it is a weird fucking story. They had this pact where they couldn't even like, like they couldn't get married, and like they like it's us together until the day we die, and just weird shit. The sister was like abused, and she was a big part of the reason they were even able to get off the air, and like no one even knows who she is. It's like it's a bizarre story, and now that I think of it, I have quite an affinity to bizarre historical occurrences. I was what the fuck is this guy's name? You ever hear about that rich dude in the colonial America? I think his name was something Dexter. Fuck. I'm literally gonna look it up like that. Oh my god. Have you ever heard of Timothy Dexter?
No, tell me the story. Let's go.
All right. Timothy Dexter was this motherfucker who, it's like, he was dumb as a sack of fucking potatoes, dude. And he just bullshit his way completely into becoming one of the richest men in America at the time. Like complete bullshit. Like people would fuck with them and be like, one of the stories I remember that's like, he had already gotten rich and he was this uneducated dumbass, and like, the rest of the aristocrats really hated him. So they were like giving him business ideas that were bad. One of them that they gave him was like, hey, how about you send coal to, what was it, Lancaster? Somewhere in the UK that was very famous at the time for manufacturing coal. And with the obvious, connotation, like, that's not a good idea. You're going to send coal to the place that manufactures coal to try to sell it. Fucker buys a ship, loads it up with coal, sends it out there, and by the time it gets there, the workers had gone on strike and they were running out of coal. Sells it for a massive profit. Should have gone fucking under. And like, it's like, there's another one where like there was these bedpans you would put under your beds, like if you lived in the UK or like, in cold climates, and you would put coal in them and it would keep you warm. And they told this guy, how about you send it over to the Indies, to the Bahamas, to the Caribbean, a very warm, temperate climate. And his stupid ass did the same thing. He sent it out there, and they used these pans to mix molasses instead of for their intended purposes. He sold all of them, got even richer. He just like all these weird fucked up stories. And then there's one where he wrote a book, dude. He wrote a fucking book, and I need you to look at that book. It's called A Pickle for the Knowing Ones. And it is all in broken English. Like the spelling is completely fucked. And then there's no punctuation anywhere in the book. Not a comma, not a period, not anything. And people were complaining about that fact, right? After it sold, was a fucking bestseller for the time. This absolute shit show of a book was a bestseller for obvious reasons.
Oh, I love the cover art. It's just like this university Latin.
No. It is definitely not. Are you looking at it? Because then he reissues the book after people complain about the fact that there's no punctuation whatsoever, and he adds 11 pages at the end of just commas, question marks, exclamation marks, periods, with a note that says, if you want punctuation marks, add them yourself. Here they are. I've provided them for you.
Okay, so I'm now seeing the actual book. Like, the first thing I saw was the preface. This is the book itself. To mankind at large, the time is come at last, to grat day of rejoicing. What is that I will tell you, thou's three kings is raised you mean, should know raised on the first royal arch in the world, almost, not quite, but very hew up upon, so they, what the fuck?
Dude, I wasn't fucking kidding. This is one of like my favorite stories ever. Like, it is so bizarre and so stupid. It's like this guy got shined upon by God. There is no explanation why anything about this man's life should have come out the way that it did. He should have tripped. He should have woke up one morning and forgot how to breathe. Like that's how bad it was. And I feel like you're going to get a lot of joy out of exploring this weirdo thing. I'm sure there's a million YouTube videos and fucking books and shit written about this dude, because it's just it's one of those guys that I wish I could pull from history and put him in front of a computer and it's like, you have a Twitter now, please. please just entertain us. And he the greatest shit poster of all time. It would be hilarious.
My favorite was always like how Newton was just mixing chemicals together in his mom's basement or whatever, and going through the Bible and inventing complex mathematics so that he could take the numbers in the Bible that are like the numbers verses and try to like calculate them together in some way that would tell him when Jesus was going to come home.
Yep.
And Edmund Halley like hears about this guy and he's like, hey, what about this comet though? And that's how calculus ends up being invented. And without that one friendship, or if you want to call it a friendship, I don't really know how chummy they were. Then most modern technology would not have evolved in the same way. Like we would not have the same understanding of the universe.
Yeah, the forces of nature are far more chaotic than we like to think, and we have convinced ourselves that these people were absolute flawless geniuses, when in reality, like a lot of their motivations were very, very fucked up. And was pure fucking luck and coincidence that things turned out the way they did. Right. And funnily enough, I'm trying to remember the date that he predicted for the end of the world was like 2056 or something like that. And I saw an article like 4 or 5 years ago about the prediction of when fish are going to run out in the oceans. And it's like somewhere around 2050. And I'm like, oh, spooky. It's obviously going to be, I don't know, who fucking knows what's going to happen. I don't think that, I'm not a very superstitious man at all, but like, it's one of those things that it's just like, that'd be a good story on like, I don't even know, like some, like the X-Files or some shit.
It's just like, I don't know. We look at things like, you even use the word superstitious, and I'm like, I'm always in this mindset of just because I don't understand it, doesn't mean there's not something, some other evidence that is just not been revealed yet.
Exactly.
Just because, to use Newton again, like all he knew was that shit fell. It's very easily observable. Like apple falls to the ground. Okay, well, why? And then it just takes a lot of extra thought to get there. And if he could make that prediction, if he could make the prediction of like a comet going around a solar system that he could not see, I mean, why couldn't he figure out when the end of the world was going to be? I don't know. I mean, I hope not.
Yeah, no, definitely not. But at the same time, when I say that with the caveat of like, I'm about as logical and reasonable as a human being can be, which is not very logical or reasonable at all. Right.
Some infinitesimally like small, tiny fraction.
Yeah, exactly. Like I pretend like I am, but in reality, I'm not. Like I acknowledge that there are things out there that we don't understand yet. I think faith is an important aspect of human society as a whole and how we function. My distinction lies at the point of like people's faith should not supersede or impose restrictions on people's freedoms. That's about it. We obviously as humans have gotten to this point because we have found a balance between our ability to rationalize and our emotional component as well, which is responsible for things like empathy. And the people that I often see that are like, oh, if we were all logical, reasonable beings and everything would be fine. It's like, no, you'd be a bunch of fucking sociopaths. And we would have, probably killed ourselves much earlier than we were probably going to kill ourselves now.
I think the source of a lot of people's anxiety is, they think of life like this vehicle they're in, like it's a car. And they are trying to stay in control of it. They want to understand every little thing, and they have to find and grasp onto something that answers all of their questions. And it's kind of like what we were getting into earlier, but I'm like, if you just take your hands off the wheel, the car keeps going. It really does. And that's just how life works. And I think we're all just in this big, messy, random pile of craziness going on all the time that we don't understand. And people who claim to understand are usually charlatans.
Yeah.
And they're going to, I'm not trying to stop them. Go be a fucking maniac, be a tyrant. And I don't want you to be a tyrant over me, but like, it's going to happen whether I do anything about it or not. And then, eventually someone's going to come along. It's all just this kind of big moving acid trip of a fucking pattern that's happening all the time. It has happened all the way through human history. So just like, when people get real uptight about, this is what I think and my take and my belief and all this kind of shit. And I'm like, man, you just need to like let go, relax, have a beer,
Yeah, dude. I mean, it's like, it's that, and it's also the extension of like when should you step in? Like what there are obviously things that we as people can be doing better, but like
your buddy Timothy Dexter is living proof. Like he didn't need to step in; it just happened,
dude. What oh my god! Thank you for circling back on this. I want to keep talking about Timothy Dexter. This motherfucker, dude. It's just like if there was a lottery back then, he would have won 7 times in a row. Like it is. Fuck, dude, it is so fucked. Like, and those are only the stories I can remember. But I just remembered another one. He faked his own death to see how many people showed up, and then when his wife wasn't crying, came out with the stick and started beating her in front of everyone. This is a fact. 3,000 people or some shit like that showed up to this man's funeral, and they were all standing there in a wake. He was getting buried, and his wife wasn't crying, and so he came out and scolded her for not grieving enough. Oh my god, his relationship with his wife, dude. Like, I'm just starting to remember this shit. It's coming back like as a flash. This guy, he would have people over at his pad, and he would tell them that he was single, and they would be like, "Well, I saw a woman coming up and down the stairs." And going, no, that's just the ghost. He would tell people his wife was dead, and that was the ghost of her. Like, it is a bizarre, like, it's one of those shits that you just can't make up. And I'm honestly, I feel like whoever's in control of the simulation, if it is a simulation, is fucking with me at that point. There's no way. Fucking possible. That insane, right?
Mark Twain had to have heard of this guy.
Oh my god.
That's got to be the inspiration for like the scene in Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn where they, go to their own funeral.
Yeah. Dude, I'm sure he did. I feel like he's an American legend that is that I stumbled upon because I was reading some book like a few years ago and they were talking about it. And I'm like, I've never fucking heard of this guy. And then I look him up and I'm like, I just went through his entire Wikipedia page and I'm like, I need more. There's no way. There's no fucking way. Like, can I check the sources? Someone's making this shit up. And then I found a book that's about him and I'm going to try to find it and I'll send it to you. And it's literally just like someone who did an analysis on his life and like retold these stories and just put them in a way that just kind of like he presented them as they were recorded and then made calculations as to how logical or how probable any of those things happening could have been and came to the conclusion that he was probably the luckiest man to have ever lived. Like it's bizarre. It's fucking bizarre. And I hope that, at some point after humanity has fallen and everything about our society has crumbled, that we have created a new pantheon of pagan gods and that he exists as one of them, as almost like this like Loki type figure where you pray to him when everything in your life is fucked and you just need something to go right. All right.
So I was going to use that as a transition to say that kind of what we're talking about, this sort of being a part of something that's big and expansive and that you can't quite understand, like you're just a small part of a largely unrevealed world, is kind of a theme of Sprawl. And the way that you, at least if I understand your plan right, in having played what I have of it, you start out with a lot of unanswered questions, a very vague thing. And it seems that just the name itself implies that you're going to slowly, kind of learn more and more about this world, which is that's almost like I'm just describing any game, but
Right.
in particular, it seems to be an overarching theme, and I was wondering if you could kind of like lead me through your thought process on that.
So I fundamentally believe that some of the best stories, some of the best games that I've ever played have been the ones that don't hold your hand, whether it's narratively or gameplay or anything else. It just kind of, it thrusts you in a world and it expects you to figure it out. People much smarter than me nowadays have kind of come to the same conclusion when it comes to gameplay that is the case. Like engaging experiences are not abrasive, but they do force you to play their game, right? The power fantasy is fun for all of 10 minutes. And you can ask Hugo Martin about the differences between Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal and the sales differences between the two and the complaints levied against the two, and realize that they probably went in the right direction. But when it comes down to story, I feel like that principle still applies too. I'm a big fan of lore. I just went on a fucking, I don't even know how long, 20-minute rant about this random dude that I learned about in history. And at the same time, that sort of same obsession has carried over into various aspects of the things that I enjoy in my life. Some of the things that I have found that I enjoy the most is like mythology or even fictional mythology. I love Lord of the Rings.
Oh my God. I was literally about to say, like, my next point about the game was going to be to bring up Lord of the Rings.
Oh, man. Dude. Are you ready?
Is your mom's name Tracy?
No.
Damn it. Is it Teresa?
Yes. Marcia Teresa.
Your mom's name is actually Teresa?
Her second name.
My mom's first name is Teresa, and she goes by Tracy. I swear to God.
My mom's second name is Teresa, which is a Spanish version of that, and first name is Marcia. That is fucking crazy, dude. You're I'm about to lose my shit. That is nuts. Yeah. Okay.
What's your dad's name?
Carlos.
Okay. Well, mine's Mark. So.
Okay. Well, if your name was also, then maybe we'd have a similar vein right there. But anyway, to get back into it just a little bit, Lord of the Rings. I love Lord of the Rings because it's just annals and annals and annals of endless lore and history that you could. He mapped out so much about that universe in a way that, if someone told me that this was lost volumes of history and actually happened fucking 30,000 years ago before the end of the world, the breaking of the world of Numenor and shit like that, like, I'd fucking believe it, dude. Languages, genealogies, it is so expansive. And it was something that after running out of actual history to read, like realizing that was also there and I could just dive into it as much as I learned to love lore. And at the same time, looking into all that kind of stuff, I try to figure out like what kind of person was this man that was able to write this stuff, right? And find out that he was such a pious man and was channeling his love of Christian romanticism into like this beautiful volumes of books and in European mythology and all things of that nature. And that inspired me to go into mythology, into linguistics, into languages, and understand and appreciate that. And I ended up filling my brain with enough of that crap that I realized that, just to circle back on the whole talking point of this, and we're definitely going to go back to Lord of the Rings at some point, but Sprawl, in a sense, and I want to give credit to Hannah too. Like a lot of her influences when it comes down to the story have made it in, but the story of Sprawl is in essence something that I've been chipping away at since I was like 16. Not because I knew it was going to be a video game, but it was just something that I would do on my free time. I would like come up with these stories and like these people that lived in this world and kind of like, it didn't have a name back then, but it was this vaguely cyberpunk kind of universe and how it got to that point. And, it was influenced by a myriad of different things. And the way that I want to present the lore of Sprawl as being something that we're not telling you anything. You have to look for it. There's going to be, have you ever played Marathon?
I have seen full playthroughs of Marathon, but I've never decided that it was worth playing.
It's not a great game, but you would love the way that they presented a story because it's like there's a Wikipedia about just the terminals. And, there were little pop-up terminals and you can find extra ones. And they wrote so much lore and so much fucking story for this game that it just blows my mind. And that's in a way how I want to present a lot of the things about Sprawl. It's like as the game progresses, like things are going to unfold, and things that you thought were a certain way are going to end up a completely different way. It's going to break a lot of the tropes that you expect out of cyberpunk, right? And it's about presenting the thing early on as being a very superficial, like, oh look, it's just it's an AI, and you're going here and you're going to topple the government, and then you slowly start to realize that that's not what's actually happening. And I can't get much more into that, but I can guarantee you that a lot of that early impression is going to like start to flip as the game starts to progress, and you start finding these logs if you decide to look for them, right? And it's going to be one of those things where it's like it's lore, but it's optional. It's lore that if you want to find, if you want to explore, and if you want to understand this world, you'll find things, and it'll be like, IP addresses that you can type in, and it'll send you to an FTP page, and you can download something, and it's this weird, like almost ARG expansive area of lore. It's a lot of stuff that I want to do like that, a lot of crossovers with the real world. And at the same time, just like how I hope that I can present the gameplay of the game, it's like you can walk around and just shoot shit and completely ignore the game loop if you want. You're not going to have a great time, and you're going to die a lot. And you can totally play the game without giving a shit about the story or anything. Like there's going to be areas where Father, the main sort of rogue, mysterious voice in your head, is talking to you, and like he's locked you in a place to kind of like, do a little exposition jump, and you can just jump over the fucking fence, and he shuts up, and he's like, okay, I guess you want to keep going, right? And having that autonomy, that level of control given to the player, I think is very important in making an engaging experience, because what makes a game great, in my opinion, is your ability to influence the game world. Whether it's through a gun or through the story or your actions in any way, shape, or form, your ability to, enact parts of your personality into the game is what makes a game for me very, very great, very, very fun. The more that you encourage emergent gameplay, I think the more fun the game becomes. And I think the games that have stood the test of time are often the ones that have either tons of emergent gameplay or tons of emergent storytelling or tons of, things that were designed to be able to happen, but not encouraged specifically. You know what I'm saying? I feel like that was a lot to unpack.
So have you ever played the game Fez?
I haven't. I've heard of it and I've looked at it. It looks interesting. The only reason I haven't is just because my time is so damn limited that like my backlog is huge. I have a ton of games on Steam that I bought and haven't even downloaded. Fez is one of them.
I'm right there with you, man. Like I can only make time for, what's really important to me. And I just happened to play Fez at some point. Like a friend recommended it to me and I played it, and it is one of the most beautifully written games without like telling you anything. It's all environmental storytelling. Yeah. And essentially, like, if you know the gist, for people who don't, you're this little 2D guy. His name's Fez because he wears a fez, and he lives in a 2D world and everything's cool. But then some shit starts happening. And then, when he gets the fez, suddenly he's opened up to the third dimension. Hmm. And so at its base, this is like a 2D platformer, but because you have the fez, you can shift your perspective and see in different dimensions. And that's how they set up most of the puzzles in the game.
Right.
And this is all analogous to, like, at least what I took away from it was humankind kind of only, existing within our 3 dimensions, and then the 4th being time, that we're aware of it, but we're not really fully able to measure it and like see it for what it is. Right. And that game goes hard. Like, it's real deep into like, there's like these ancient alien civilizations, and just like through suggestion and environmental storytelling, they tell this really prolific mythological story. And because we were kind of going on the tangent of myth, I mean, we brought up Tolkien, and he was very, very into, the Beowulfs and the poetic Eddas and all this stuff. He was also a linguist, and he really understood And he had a very famous argument with C.S. Lewis, who
Yeah.
I guess they were buddies and all this, about, C.S. Lewis is, why are you trying to like tell myths? Like myths are just lies. And Tolkien was like, even though you're not literally telling people what happened, the beauty of myth is that you're conveying an idea through the story. And it's so much more of an efficient way to send information through, eons than writing a book that tells a literal history of something.
Yeah.
And, he was trying to sort of create a unified mythology of England. Right.
Mhm.
And he was very, very devoutly Catholic guy. And a lot of Lord of the Rings was influenced by his experiences in the war too.
Yeah.
But his understanding of why it was so, why are these stories about Odin and Thor and Loki so important that, people have held on to them orally for thousands of years. And then even, they're written down, by people who didn't understand them, who were Roman monks and shit. They were like, well, we should probably write down what these people think, keep them. And even here we are almost 1,000 years after that happens, and it's still hugely inspirational to people.
Yeah.
I mean, that could be said of pretty much any belief system or text or whatever. Like that is such a beautiful understanding of how storytelling should work.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, you have said that in a way that I probably would have just said the exact same way. That's your understanding of the man is incredible. Yeah, like his belief in myth and how it overlaps with culture, how it overlaps with language and history, and how history can become myth and myth even become history is incredible, right? And his love of beautiful things stem from that. Like in the same way that it's like a lot of these stories are ancient beyond our understanding, and they share so much with each other, right? It's like down to the names that we gave these characters, like they all, depending on what culture you're analyzing in Europe, they have the same characters. They just are a little bit different. And if you go further back, we've started to realize through like analysis of the Proto-Indo-European language that like, these are historical loan words. And for the most part, Europe is it stems from this Proto-Indo-European culture. There's one language isolate, which is the Basque, that's a whole another story, like that's a people that are very intriguing, and I encourage you to look up their history. But
the Finns kind of had their own language tree as well.
Yeah. But a lot of the stories, and they're sort of like the names of the gods down to like, in Proto-Indo-European, it's, I think, and I'm going to butcher these pronunciations because they it's a lot of guttural sounds that are ancient, and I can't for the life of me pronounce them, but it's like, they had a name for the god of the main god of the pantheon, and his name was Deus Jupiter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Deus Jupiter. That in and of itself, like, just extends to everything from Deus to Zeus to, they had another one called Wodan Perkanos or something like that, and Wodan Odin, and then Wodan
Wednesday.
Wednesday. It's such like, it all stems from like a unified cultural understanding as far as we believe, right?
Europe up until very recently was one of the most like ethnically homogenous places that you could go, right? Like there's far more diversity in Africa than there is, really anywhere else in the world, but especially compared to, white Europe.
Yeah, but at the same time, like ancient European history is extremely diverse. They have a mythological sort of unison, but the cultures were so beautiful and different out there. I mean, and this is coming from someone who is not a European at all. Like I see it, and it's like, the beliefs of these people are they stem from something that's almost homogenous, but they spread out and they changed in such ways, and they had so many different cultural overlaps, like the difference between Spain and the Balkans, right? Like, and their culture, their dress, their sound, their languages. It's a small space of land that had a very large and diverse range of linguistic and oral histories. And I feel like Tolkien saw this and wanted to kind of like unify them. Yes, it was like a unified history of England, but also of greater Europe in general. Like a lot of the stories, like of Beren and Luthien, or of what I'm trying to remember, the children of Huron.
Mm-hmm.
That's a Finnish tragedy that he retold. You know, I'm trying to remember the name of the actual Finnish tragedy, and I'm not going to be able to. But I just know like the story of the man who killed the dragon, but ended up tragically, having an incestuous relationship with his sister, to say the least.
I don't know if this is Finnish, but like sounds a lot like Sigurd, and that the whole a lot of these stories again are intercultural. Like, so I mean, you hear the Ring Cycle, Wagner's work was, and Tolkien both kind of had the same influence in the story, the legend of Sigurd, and then you realize that there's like the German version of that same story, and then there's the Icelandic version of that same story. There's the Norse version of the same story. It's like that story is far older than any of its like written text. So we have this tendency to kind of, carbon data document and be like, well, this story is about that old. But like in reality, like, no, that's just the first time, or that's the only instance of like, we found a written document of that. We don't know how many times they wrote it down and it got destroyed or lost in like an Alexandria situation.
Or how long it was passed down as an oral history before anyone decided that it needed to be carved into like a rock or some shit like that, right?
And the same thing applies to the Iliad and the Odyssey with Homer and many other examples. Like, it's just, these are stories that people felt they're so important to them, and the lessons that could be learned from them, that they had to keep them alive even when they didn't have a written language to do so. That's what I mean. If you read the Havamal, Odin is very, very clear about how important the runes are. They say the runes, and we think of runes as like these mystical things. They literally, like, writing was considered holy, like this sacred thing, because it was so important.
To the point that he went through an absolute tribulation, a trial of torture and pain to self-sacrifice, almost in a Christian way, to present and reveal the runes to the gods and to this people, right?
Yeah.
And for PG reasons, I'm not going to retell that story, but it's not very nice. I'll tell you that much. But yeah, I totally agree. And like where that stems and where that goes on to philosophically, the importance of writing or of sharing these stories, or to have these things in a quote unquote timeless way, that the recognition of those ancient cultures, to see that and to be like the big tenet of their, the god of the gods, right? The center of the pantheon, to have done that, to reveal that to himself like that, it shows a sort of, I'm trying to say an intelligence, almost like an awareness of an ancient culture and of an ancient history and of an ancient people that we often don't give them credit for. Right.
And Odin is given the name Allfather, not because he's literally the father of all the gods, but because he wasn't even the first god, right? He was just the one who realized, the whole story. And I mean, we could have a whole dissertation on Ragnarok and the philosophy behind what does that really mean? But like, he was the one who first understood that, like, there is a cycle here. He saw the full picture. He where will you be when the acid hits? Like, kind of thing.
Exactly.
And anyway, like, the whole point of me getting on that tangent was to say that, like, that's such a huge inspiration on you as a storyteller. And what I'm looking for in Sprawl is exactly what you kind of stated already. Like, that, I'm not going to tell you everything about the world. You don't need to, it's not important even to understand every little detail, and have it spoon fed to you. You just need to understand that there's something bigger and looming at play that you will gradually if you look for it, understand. But that's to tie it back into the runes, like, read the runes in the green grass and all that sort of thing. Like you're just looking for little subtle clues to help you draw a little bit closer to the bigger picture at all times.
Exactly. And again, it relates back to like the kind of storytelling and the things that I enjoy. It doesn't come from anything else besides that. Like, a lot of people like to come into this kind of ordeal with the gravitas about like the way I'm doing it is the best way of doing it. And I hold no such beliefs. The way I'm doing it is just the way that I enjoy it. And I hope that other people enjoy it, and for the same reason, which presents one problem when it comes to conveying it, because I don't want to tell people, but at the same time, it's like, how do you communicate to your audience and to people who are interested into the game that that's a core tenet of it, right? Down to the gameplay, right? And the core loop about there are more efficient options than other options, but you can still do what you want. You're just not going to have the greatest time. We expect you to kind of figure it out. It's going to be a challenging experience until you do. There's going to be a lot of places where like that gameplay going to start to expand and change. And that was the challenge of being able to pack all of that into such a small sliver of what the greater picture of this game is at first level. Right. And it's one of those things where I've thankfully have had people that were close to me that tested this already a month ago or more, and have told me that they have gone back and replayed it over and over again and have started to pick up more and more and more things, and like figured out new parts of the combat loop or new parts of the enemy design or like new parts of the environmental storytelling, or found an area of the map that they didn't even know was there and is completely unnecessary for you to even go there. And discovered a bit of environmental storytelling there and asked me questions like, what's this guy doing there? Right? Why is he on fire and hanging off these cables? What's that about? And then me having to just kind of hold my tongue and be like, I don't know. You'll figure it out eventually. But having that aspect of these people going back who typically are guys who do not enjoy this type of game nor enjoy single player experiences or anything of this kind of sort, kind of wanting to go back and discovering these things and telling me that they enjoy that aspect of it, has been an incredibly humbling and heartwarming experience, and possibly the best part about doing this all, because at the end of the day, the reason I'm doing it is because I want to share an aspect of what makes me like, the creative side of me, the artistic side of me. This is an expression of that to its core. It's that's the reason I'm doing this, at least, because I truly believe in everything about that game, about that experience, about the whole package. And I'm willing to sit down and work on it for 12 hours and then go to sleep for 3 and then wake up in the morning and be like, shit, I'm excited to go back and finish this thing. Right. Like it's fun. It's life-giving. And it's something that I haven't had, until very recently with music. And there's a whole another thing that we're going to do with music, unrelated to Sprawl, with me and my projects, that has given me life in that kind of sense as well. But it's an exciting prospect. It's something that makes me very happy that I'm able to do.
One of the things, like the biggest challenges, and I feel like when I was kind of writing out my notes on the demo, I hope it didn't come across the wrong way, but like I know that a lot of people are going to look at this game at the very surface level and be like, okay, it's Boomer Ghost Runner, we get it. And I mean, immediately, like there are so many similarities that it's really hard to ignore, at least in the early part of the game, because you start off in like the kind of cyberpunk dilapidated city. You've got the robot guy who's kind of like guiding you along. You got the samurai sword, you've got the parkour and like the, neon flashing arrow lights that you jump across. And like, these are all, it's not like Ghost Runner invented these things. It's just like kind of the most popular recent example of something like that happening. But then you have the addition of the other weapons. Like you're not doing this like ability tree, at least not from what I've played. You're doing like get guns and shotguns and machine guns and kind of figure out how to use those to move around the enemies in an efficient enough way that they're not killing you faster than you kill them, which is, that's essentially Doom. in a nutshell.
Yeah.
But there's so much more to it. There's so much more like environmental storytelling going on that it's just really hard to ignore. And I hope that people don't miss that. So do you have like a design philosophy that will be a fail-safe for that, or are you just kind of relying on word of mouth? What's your plan?
Well, it's one of those things where it's like, yes, there is an underlying design philosophy to the whole thing that we're going to slowly reveal as time goes on. And same thing as a story, but like, it's hard. I believe a lot in contrast. I believe a lot that when something is loud and it's always loud, then it's not loud. When something is always bright, then it's not bright. When something is always white, then it's just not white. It's just that. That's all it is. When you have
it said like the notes you don't play are more important than the notes you do.
Yep.
Yeah. The spaces between the notes, all that.
Exactly. Yeah. Silence. And, we as producers have quantified this into dynamic range in music is so important, blah, 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 blah. But like that extends far beyond that. Like the reason why Tolkien stories, for example, are so powerful is because there's the ups and the downs. It's not just one hero that fucking blazes through the whole thing and it's done. It's like tragic, absolute fuck things happen to these people. And there's a history and a diversity. And like, at any point could have Manwë stepped down from the fucking heavens and been like, fuck you, Sauron, bye. But the whole point is that there's a contrast between incredible good with incredible evil, which is, I guess, a very Western way of thinking of things, and more in other philosophies, there's a whole spectrum. But at the same time, that applies to storytelling, that applies to the game design, that applies to everything that I want to do with Sprawl. We want to do all these things. But if we present them all at once, and if we only focus on doing those things, then they don't have the same impact and they don't have the same power as if we have the other aspects kind of seeping in, right? Like you can make a game that's all gravitas, but then it has no impact because there's nothing else to kind of contrast that side of things. When you have a game that starts off doing everything that we want to do from the first time that you do it, like as soon as you pick it up, you have nowhere to go from there. When it comes down to the marketing and the showing of the game and the things that we're doing, if we show everything at once, we have nowhere to go with it. We want to slowly open up the world and slowly open up the narrative and slowly open up everything that we're doing to continue to have people be interested in what we're making. I think that's a really important thing. And a lot of projects and a lot of music and a lot of the things that I've seen die because they're unable to keep providing that core tenet of contrast. And so when it comes down to the philosophy of it's all about contrast, but it's also about making sure that we're able to portray that in an interesting way. So like you play the first level, you see the first level, and we're going to put out a playthrough sometime very soon. Maybe even it's already come out by the time this podcast come out of the entirety of the first level. Aware that a lot of people are going to see this and come to the same conclusion that you did. In the same way that the stories that Tolkien said were far more ancient than him, people see those stories and they're like, oh, that's Lord of the Rings. The AI talking to you in your head, that comes from William Gibson and Neuromancer that came out in 82. And funnily enough, Blade Runner was developed completely independently and aesthetically independently of Neuromancer. They came out around the same time and they had never talked to each other. There was nothing. They were just the same cultural influences, but they told a similar story and in a similar place. And that sort of idea is going to be, like you're going to see it from the surface level and it's going to present itself as being like just that story again. But there's going to be so much more that we're going to be able to slowly roll out, and hopefully with that slow rollout, provide enough emergent and changing things to keep people interested and attract new people to the product and, make people's impressions of it change. And as that was the approach that I wanted to do. And if you see the first video we ever posted, we just show off two of our enemy types, even though there was more already in the game, and two of the weapons, when we could have sat there and shown off everything else. But the whole point is to not do that. It's to slowly reveal these things. And so people made and pass judgment on it. And you can look at, if you care about it, looking up internet forums that are talking about the game, and they all pass a judgment. It's like, it's just this and it's boring. But then you see these same people start talking about it with the new stuff that's coming out, and their appraisal changes. And they're like, wait, this looks kind of cool. I didn't know this was a part of the game. Or that's interesting. And I feel like that's going to happen with this video as well. Some of those people that had already passed their judgment are going to realize that things are changing. This is presenting itself as something different. And then the next level is going to be the same thing. And as we show off some of those new enemies as well, right? And it's not like we're doing this as we go. We are maybe placing things into the game as we go, but the entire outline, from the first level to the last level, the story, the narrative, everything is already written out. The whole plan, everything. We know what we're doing with this. It might change a little bit, but we have an exact idea as this is step 1, this is step B, this is how we're making this game, and we know it's going to work. Because we've learned our lessons from our contemporaries and from as many other people that have tried to make this kind of thing before. And I hope, and that's all I can do. I hope that this approach works out.
Something that you mentioned to David when you're on his show, Don't Truck, shit, my bad.
Yeah. No,
doxed. I really enjoyed it, and I thought this was like a totally different take that you just don't hear enough, because a lot of people kind of lump cyberpunk into just like this one sliver, like this, it means this thing. And you were kind of explaining how there in fact are and have become subgenres within that. And you were describing how you were more a fan of like the Ghost in the Shell like version of cyberpunk than necessarily like a Blade Runner kind of thing. And since you already kind of brought up the comparison between Neuromancer and Blade Runner, I was kind of hoping you might elaborate a bit more on that topic.
100%. I mean, it's something I'm really passionate about, and I've done projects musically and projects, like I said, the story of Sprawl, the namesake itself comes from William Gibson. That's what he described you asked me if I was from Alabama, but it's like, no, it's from Bama.
Damn it.
You were waiting.
I made a note, like a mental note to bring that up, and then I forgot about it. And you finally, so just long story short, I wrote Revel and I was like, so you're from Alabama because your Twitter page says Bama on it. And I'm like, oh, sick. Like, so there's somebody in Alabama smart enough to make a game. Holy shit. I'm not the only guy out there, which is obviously a stupid joke. But so what is it? It's the Boston.
It's the Boston something metropolitan area. I don't know what the A is.
Oh, you don't even know.
No, I knew. But it's like I said, I my brain has this ability to retain a lot of knowledge, but paraphrase a lot of it. Just to go on a little side
chunking.
Yeah, like I
Boston Atlanta Metropolitan Axis.
No, I was completely wrong.
Yeah, it's on your wiki page and also in our messages. I scrolled up.
There, it's one of those things. I'm good at remembering the big picture, not the small details most of the time. I can go on rants about something, and then when you ask me what the name of it was, I'll be like, about that, that's why I'm not a programmer. Anyway, to kind of get back into the gist of what I wanted to say, it's like cyberpunk exists just like myth and stories do in different lineages, right? And they go into different directions. And the kind of cyberpunk that I was always a big fan of, and the stuff that I felt was really powerful, was, a subsidiary of like sort of the Eastern take on it. Japan had its own version of cyberpunk that was really, just Blade Runner was gritty, but it built an aesthetic that there's nothing wrong with it, that was very much based in the 80s, right? And a lot of Western cyberpunk has been stuck there. And it all kind of looks and feels the same. It all sounds like 80s synthwave, and it all has those neon lights, and it's all like tinted blue, and it all like nothing wrong with that. Just not my kind of thing. Whereas I feel like everything about Ghost in the Shell and Akira was grounded in a reality and a grittiness that stems from the cultural experiences of Japan as a country after the Second World War. and their fears of certain kinds of things happening. Whereas the West was afraid of Japan eventually taking over, and that's why you see all those signs in Japanese. Japan was afraid of a different subset of things happening culturally. You know, and when you see the aesthetics of something like Akira, you see a lot of like body horror and a lot of like industrial, dark, dingy design that's very different from the lineage of Blade Runner and Neuromancer.
Mm-hmm.
Influenced by them, obviously. They came after it, but different. And then when you get to Ghost in the Shell, Mamoru Oshii, who is the director, had a very clear vision about what that was going to look like. And you can see it in his earlier and later works, you know, with Pat Labor and Angel's Egg and stuff like that, that he liked the dilapidated, the darkness, the edgy, the grungy, the more human side of that, and how that philosophically is problematic with its incompatibilities with human identity. Mamoru Oshii is actually, I think, I'm pretty sure, is also a Christian, and is influenced by those sorts of works and the philosophical ramifications of cyberization and humanity. And a lot of the cityscapes and the environments that he portrayed are reflections of that. So he did a very different take on what cyberpunk was. They flew to Hong Kong in the 90s and used that as the visual inspiration as to what the dilapidated, the human side of the city was going to look like. And they contrasted that with this beautiful, architecturally pristine world of like the modern side. And that's where you get like those sort of like old Hong Kong signs that are rusted and broken, and the apartment blocks that were very much part of communist China's relationship with the Soviet Union and the commie blocks of Khrushchev, and those kind of designs that are very homogenous, and there was not a lot of personality in them. And you know how that sort of changed as Hong Kong's stance as a independent city, separate from the greater Chinese government was. Like you ended up seeing, you know, like the streets get polluted with all of these neon signs, and then all of these like other signs that were all just competing for visual space, and a very clear representation of when everything is loud, nothing is loud. But that lineage ended up being very different from what the West was still doing with cyberpunk. It was, like I said, very still rooted in the 80s, whereas that was a more modern take and perspective. And that felt very fresh to someone who liked the genre and wanted to see it grow and change, or maybe be portrayed differently in Western media. And I feel like a lot of the games and different things that are cyberpunk, which I enjoy a lot. My favorite game is Deus Ex. And despite cyberpunk's problems, I love that game. But I think visually, they didn't do enough to challenge what you expect that world to look like. A lot of what you're going to realize about Sprawl's design and visual influences, it's going to be very downtrodden. It's very, very heavy, very dark. It's not going to be very, you know, bright, shiny neon lights. It's not going to be a lot of like upbeat, you know, design and those feelings of isolation that were so prevalent in Oshii's work and Ghost in the Shell specifically, the first and the second one. They're going to be reflected in the visual design of Sprawl. And I feel like that really differentiates what we're doing with, say, like other things in the genre. People have done slums in cyberpunk. That's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is more or less about that sort of monotony and that disconnect between a visual identity and an internal identity, and how that could be reflected in the world. Whether or not people end up picking up on that or like even give a shit about what I'm saying is irrelevant to me. Like, obviously I would love them to, but it's the guiding principle behind everything that I do. Like, you'll start to notice that a lot of things, even in that first level, is like they're religious structures. There's scans of temples and stuff like that, but they're surrounded by grime and dirt and very, you know, encroaching aspects of humanity, of technology. When you get to that center plaza with all the screens, if you look at that tower, it's an obelisk with a bunch of, you know, religious depictions on it, but it's covered in pipes and screens and wires. the destruction of beautiful human things with humans' technology is kind of like the guiding visual principle behind Sprawl.
I actually find that topic really interesting because, okay, we always talk about, a city that's fallen to nature or whatever, like it's given way to ages and trees and everything grow back through it and it becomes a ruin. But we consider that to be like beautiful, like just in our culture, at least, that we look at that and we're like, oh, isn't that amazing how nature always, comes back and reclaims the earth and all this sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And I totally, like, on a personal level, have the same gut feeling of technology and industrialism being this sort of looming, understandable, unstoppable evil that will probably end up doing exactly what it's a beautiful metaphor. Just like this religious structure is taken over by pipes and lights and everything, and it loses its humanity in the process. Mm-hmm. But we're at this point now in technology where we're kind of, it almost feels natural, right? Like you and I are talking to each other through a computer screen right now, through an array of wires and microphones and data and fucking, internet cables and whatever. And that, like, I don't feel guilty about that. And I do think that I would prefer to just be sitting at a fucking bar, but that's not the case right now.
I agree.
But
I would too.
It is equally natural that people build things as anything else. So, like, a building being dilapidated by humans just building more shit on top of it is not. It's not. This wouldn't even be the first time that happened. Look at the Aztecs and the Incas and the Mayas are like 3 layers of civilization built on top of each other, all with like thousands of years in between them. The same thing if you were to look at Cairo, and the same thing if you look at a lot of these places.
If you look at Rome
Europe,
today, look at Rome today. You got the Colosseum smack dab in the middle of a very modern city that has a rich history with the Renaissance, with the unification of Italy, with fascist Italy, and then with modern European identity. Right? Like it's all living next to each other. Whereas, the Western lineage of cyberpunk just kind of like has different cultures meshing with each other, but it doesn't show the same culture building upon itself.
Yeah.
Which is something that I again, as someone who is a fan of history and of humanity in general and the problems that are going to face it over the course of the next 100 years, I think isn't represented enough in the media. In cyberpunk in general, there's obviously different genres that do a better job of it, but I think that cyberpunk has such a beautiful potential to inform and to be reflective and an incredible ability to be the modern myth of our generation that, we may not face these kinds of tribulations, or it might be our kids, but there's so much that can happen that we can use these stories to prepare ourselves for, right? Do we want the dystopia or the protopia? Are we going to be subjected to both at the same time? Are the divides that divide us only going to grow stronger, wider? Is there evidence pointing to the contrary? There's so much that I want to do with that genre, that it influences a lot of the art that I make to this day. And yes, we're packaging so much of that into a very, you can call it a very lowbrow vehicle, right? It's a retro FPS where you blow shit up and the blood goes everywhere, right? But I think like those sorts of carnal pleasures and the way that I'm going to tie them and kind of conclude them into the story it's an interesting meta, and I can't talk more about it because I want it to be a surprise.
The way that you describe cyberpunk in general, and I would just say science fiction as a whole, like sci-fi, I mean, for the past literally 100 years, has always kind of been the bastard child of literature. And it's like hard. Most people wouldn't even call it literature, in a serious sense. It very much is, to me anyway. But like, you hear the same arguments when people are talking about, we're going to talk about Tolkien again. Yeah, so if you hate J.R.R. Tolkien, sorry, we're just going to keep talking. But high fantasy at a certain point was not taken seriously as a genre. You know, he was the first guy to really do it. I mean, you'd had the like T.H. White, and then C.S. Lewis, and sort of all of these guys were kind of contemporary and around the same time, but just really amazing stuff. And T.H. White at least had he was writing the Arthurian legend, which people were familiar with, and it wasn't like this big offshoot thing. But Tolkien inventing like a whole new universe was definitely weird, and people didn't understand it, and they didn't take it seriously. And now here we are, 70 years later from the Lord of the Rings being published. When was The Hobbit? Even before that, 38?
Yeah, Hobbit was before that. Before that. He was writing these stories in the fucking trenches, you know, and those stories evolved and changed.
Yeah.
In a mythological, sociological sense, in the same way you would pass them down. It kind of feels like those stories changed in that same way, which I always felt was a really interesting part and a reason why those stories were so reflective of that idea.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to eventually go on a tangent about the orcs and how like people look at the orcs and they're like, well, you know, maybe Tolkien was like a racist or whatever. Like, who are these people supposed to represent? And I'm like, no, the orcs represent, like, at least from my point of view, and I think his point of view as well, industrial warfare.
Yeah.
Like there weren't no particular ethnic group invoked there. It was just like when war becomes business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's 100%. I mean, the whole story of Saruman burning down Fangorn to fuel the industries of war, and how he, you know, Sauron was not a Maiar. Yeah, he was a Maiar of Aule, right? The god of craft, of industry. I could have totally butchered that, but if I remember that correctly, that's how it was. And Sauron was the greatest of his sort of Maiar, his demigods, right? And so Sauron is a tragic character in many sense because he fell to Melkor, which is basically, you know, Satan in the Tolkien universe, and someone you probably don't hear a mention of except like in a passage or two in Lord of the Rings or in The Hobbit. And he wanted a piece of Melkor, just wanted to destroy things that were beautiful because he was a petulant child. Sauron just wanted to organize the world. He wanted industry to take over. He wanted to have everything be in order. He felt like the world as governed by nature was governed by chaos, and that he was a force of order to come in and to rectify all these things.
There was another guy that felt that way too in the 1930s.
Yeah, there's a couple of them. But yeah, it's like you're totally right. The representation of orcs is definitely one of like industry and of the destruction of the natural world for the sake of quote unquote progress. Whether or not you agree with these sorts of things is beyond the point of what Tolkien was trying to make. You know, and there are maybe cultural overlaps with like some of the side stories. The Haradrim, for example, are definitely supposed to be, you know, Arabic in nature, but like that, his approach to that wasn't so much xenophobic or racist. It was mostly, I would like to at least believe, of the cultural fears of Europe at the time that was being invaded by these forces. They weren't necessarily evil, but they were outsiders. And so the culture at the time perceived them as that, and he wanted to preserve that in his telling of the myths. As I'm aware, he was a tolerant man in a time where he had no reason to be tolerant. Fought against intolerance his entire life. He did not. He had a, you know, I think Nazi Germany asked him about his lineage when they were trying to publish some of his books, and he told them, "I am proudly not a Jew, but I wish I was."
He's German.
His
name's Tolkien. Like,
yeah,
and I mean, who gives a shit? Like at the end of the day, he's just like, he was maybe the lead. He might actually still be the leading expert of his time in all of German mythology, which was, you know, being simultaneously used to try to justify what was going on. And he was disgusted. He was like, this is the most disgusting, gross bastardization of what the Nordic myths ever set out to say. And for you to use it in the way that you're doing it is like the most anti-German thing you could ever do. And died feeling that way, you know. And he was upset when the Catholic Church stopped speaking Latin. Like,
yeah, yeah, fucking was. He was he was obviously a product of his times, but he was also a very different breed than he could have been.
Yeah, I mean,
considering everything that was happening, his experiences, he was in the same war as Hitler, and he came out of it a completely different person than he did. You know, it's complex. It's obviously complex, just like the rest of humanity and like the rest of the people and our reconciliation with things that we now recognize as problematic now. But you know, like I think you have to also observe a lot of these people in the era that they existed and contextualize them. And I think that's also a very important thing in storytelling and beyond. You know, it's like, it's the most bastardized way that I could probably say that is the Simpsons effect. Like, everyone sees the Simpsons now and it's like, that's nothing special, but like, you know, at the time it was different. And
I feel that way
with Half-Life, right? It's like you play Half-Life now and it's like, oh, it's a piece of shit. Like, this is what's so cool about this. It's like, well, think about when it fucking came out, you dumbass. Like that's how you have to observe these things. You pass judgment based on their context, not so much where they exist now.
When you listen to the Beatles, you hear every rock band that came after the Beatles. So for me, like, how could you not love the Beatles? I'm like, it's not like I don't appreciate them. It's just that when I hear the Beatles, I hear every other rock band.
Yeah.
From then on. So like, it doesn't sound all that special now. I'm sure in, 1960s, it was like, whoa, dude.
I mean,
wow. Like, and it absolutely was.
There's a reason we're still talking about them today.
Yeah.
It was.
Anyway, I went on that tangent to make a point about the tangent that I was on before that tangent, which was another tangent of something else.
Yeah.
So sci-fi in general and cyberpunk as a part of sci-fi, I don't know how you really describe cyberpunk other than like the artistic, the visualized artistic portrayal of science fiction. Maybe that's a good way to put it.
It's definitely cyberpunk as a genre, at least to me, feels like the author's desire to tackle the same forces of modernization that, inspired Tolkien to write the orcs, but take them to a logical conclusion and understand how that's going to affect their lives, whether it's massive urbanization or, cyberization of human beings, our increasing reliance on computers, all these kinds of things. I mean, despite like what you were saying, that sci-fi almost feels like the reject child of literature, there's an increasing, the power and the prophetic nature of fucking someone like Gibson just blows my mind.
I was going to say the same thing about Asimov
as well, and Philip K. Dick, and so many authors. But I love this example of Gibson because it relates to what I do. Do you know that Gibson invented dubstep?
Like, no.
in 82, in Neuromancer, he describes that the Rastafarians that live on the space station listen to a highly processed digital version of dub music. What the fuck, man? I read that, like, I could have bastardized that line completely, but I read that shit in like, I don't even know, 2011 or something like that. And like, I just sat there like, wait, wait, how the fuck did he predict that this weird offshoot of Rastafari reggae would then get shipped somewhere into the UK and the lineages of rave music in America would somehow coalesce and create garage in the UK, which then would transform and morph into dubstep. That the man was an oracle. He had a fucking Palantir. I guarantee you, sitting in his fucking room. There's no way that out of all his predictions, handheld computers, the internet called the Matrix, all these fucking other crazy ideas, that to me is the one that really blew my mind. As a musician, as someone who at the time may have partook in the dub of stepping.
I remember I drew the line when I walked into Hot Topic and I saw a shirt that said sex, drugs, and dubstep, and I was like, you can't have that. Yeah. Rock and roll will never die. I'll die. I'll piss on dubstep's grave, I swear. No, but
no, it's because it's like everything else. The dubstep has a bad rep because of the commercialization of dubstep.
Of course.
There's
Of course.
beautiful dubstep. There's beautiful dub music that is very passionate. You ever listen to Burial?
Burial? Like, no, I don't think so.
I will send you Burial, and all my friends who are listening to this are going to laugh their fucking asses off because I am notorious for, if anyone talks about Burial to me, I will sit you down for 2 hours and talk about Burial with you. I'm not going to do that right now, but I encourage you to listen to his music. It is the most somber, dark, and incredibly human music that I can attribute to an electronic artist. And there is a myriad of reasons why that, again, if you're curious down the line, then I will gladly hop on the phone with you and talk to you about why Burial is so amazing. But I encourage you to listen to his music.
I'll check out anything you recommend at this point, man. Like, I've already got a lot of homework to do. Just Timothy Dexter alone is gonna take up the rest of my evening.
That's fucking right. That's fucking right.
I guess the point I was trying to make was that science fiction, cyberpunk, whatever, it is still myth. It is just taking what's happening now and extrapolating it to the future in a mythological sense to teach a lesson or to, do an experiment to try to figure out, like, how should we be? What are we? These very basic, visceral human questions. One of my favorite short stories that I've ever written is The Last Question by Asimov. Mm-hmm. And actually, dude, like, couple weeks ago, me and my wife went up to visit some friends in Seattle and went to the Mopop, and I got to, like, stand next to Asimov's typewriter that he wrote a lot of these stories on. And it was just so cool. Like, but in The Last Question, I'll fucking spoil it. It's like 13 pages long if somebody wants to go read it. But, it's just this kind of like 3-part repeating kind of chorus of a short story where it's like, in the year, blah, 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 like shortly after now, there's a supercomputer and people ask it like, hey, what's the meaning of life? What should we do? And it always responds like, I don't have enough data to answer that question right now. And then, and then they ask it again, like several thousand years later in a spaceship, and they ask it again, like in another situation that's even more extrapolated than that. And the computer outlives the people. And then at the end of the story, the computer finally, like, has had enough time and enough data to process what it's trying to do. And it says, let there be light. And that's the end of the story.
Yeah.
And it's just this really beautifully crafted and prolific kind of way of describing this idea that we are sort of manifesting our own future. We just don't really see all the parts to it yet. I think that's kind of been the theme of this conversation.
Yeah.
Overall.
And that you just summed up perfectly probably what we're all trying to say here, both you and me. The idea of everything being cyclical, the gravitas of humanity, the philosophical ramifications of God. And cyberpunk is a genre. If there is not a God, then maybe we should create him. Like, so much to unpack there if you choose to do so. We probably have to maybe logically wrap up at some point soon, but I do want to touch on one more thing I feel about Sprawl and about the storytelling. You called sci-fi almost the reject child of literature. And I want to touch on why Sprawl to me made so much sense to be made as a dude who had no reason to be making a video game. I'm a musician. I make dance music, and specifically dance music, and I'm making a cyberpunk video game, and not only just cyberpunk, but cyberpunk from the Eastern lineage, derived from anime in general. And it's also a video game. If the reason I'm spelling it out in such a slow way is because I want to touch upon the fact that I am very much a fan of the reject children of things and how they influenced each other. And in the 90s, you had a form of music that was being developed that no one believed was music. It was highly electronic. It was processed by machines and by people who were not musicians. It was dance music. You had a form of storytelling that was emerging from Japan that was anime that was trying hard to be taken seriously and created arguably one of my favorite films, Ghost in the Shell from 1995. And it was not considered film. And you had video games who we don't even have to talk much about, but we can just come to the conclusion, but for a very long time, they were not considered art. And in the 90s, this magical thing happened where all three of these sort of reject children kind of hung out with each other at the lunch table and collaborated, and you had anime influencing video games being soundtracked by dance music. The reason I'm doing Sprawl as a retro FPS is because those are the three things that I like. It was arguably easier for me to make Sprawl look modern. A lot of the workflow that I do to make my assets spits out modern looking things. I then take that and I make it look quote unquote retro. The reason I do so is because I am immensely curious and immensely influenced by that overlap of those three things in the 90s. Something like Wipeout that, with those types of graphics on the PS1 and the soundtrack is all like The Prodigy or Photech or these incredible acts from that era. And a lot of the music that I make for my personal project as Revel is influenced by the 90s. To me, the logical conclusion of what I could do to push my love for all these three things at the same time was to make a retro 90s game. And that's the reason I'm doing it. That's the reason that I feel like it needs to be packaged in this way, because those three things lived with each other. And I think some of my favorite things that I've ever consumed were products of that. And we don't recognize that enough. And if there's one thing I could even lend evidence to, is probably even like one of my favorite probably ambient albums is the Quake soundtrack by 9 Inch Nails.
Huge fan.
Why the fuck was that even a thing? And it's because of that relationship. And the more you look in the 90s, the more you're going to find that a lot of that overlap happened.
I guess that's a good place to wrap it up, man. I've had a absolutely spectacular time just getting to know you a bit. And I did not anticipate that this was going to be such a parallel conversation.
Dude, fucking me neither, man. That down to the mom name is fucking bizarre.
Well, you make sure you tell Teresa that I said hello and that I love her, and happy belated Mother's Day and all that.
And you tell her the same thing. But man, at this point, I feel like we have so much in common that if you ever want to tap me to do another one of these, I will gladly in a heartbeat do it. That was a blast.
We're gonna get you. Blast. We're gonna get you on again. Literally whenever you want. Just like, hey, I have some shit I need to say. I'm like, all right, well, let's record it and put it out in the world. But like, as the game continues to develop, when you get the public demo out, when you get first, if you're going to do early access, I'm assuming you probably will. We'll do it then. We'll do it again after that. As you make updates, and then when the final game releases, we'll have a big fucking party. It'll be great.
And when the Amazon Lord of the Rings series comes out, we'll go on here and just like get whiskey drunk and cry about how bad it is. How about that?
I think the Silmarillion is going to be good, man. I really hope so. I really
they're not doing the Silmarillion. That's the problem. They're doing like that. They don't have the rights to it. They have the rights to the index, the annexes at the very end of Lord of the Rings, which kind of talks about the Second Age. So they're having to invent a bunch of shit, and their head lore master has quit. 3 of their actors have quit because they don't like the direction that their characters are going. I am sad as to where this thing is going to end up. Right, and I'm going to need to vent with someone, and we'll figure it out.
We'll just talk about Star Trek instead.
All right. That works. That's awesome, man. You're a good fucking dude. It is. We're two peas in a pod. That's awesome. If I'm ever out in Arizona playing a show or something, I fully expect you and me to grab a beer or something. You're a cool fucking dude.
Or the same if I end up in LA for some ungodly reason.
Hopefully you don't, but if you do, then you're more than welcome. Anytime. That was fucking awesome, man. Thank you so much for having me on. You're, like I said, an incredible fucking dude. Get some rest, relax. I know you're not going to do it because as soon as I'm done with this, I'm going to get back to work too. But like I said, I'm at any time I'm here. Anything I could ever do for you, I'm fucking here. Just let me know.
Same to you, brother. music this week is by Revel, and it is from the Sprawl soundtrack. So if you dig this track, you're going to get a whole lot more of that in the game. Of course, thank you to him, first of all, for the music, and also for being a guest on the podcast. That was amazing. I had a great time getting to know him. Shout out to Mother Teresa and my mama, Teresa. Tracy. I love you, Mom. And shit, we're coming up on episode 100, and it's going to be epic, and I can't wait for you to hear it, because I'm not going to spoil it. It's just going to be cool. Anyways, if you're digging this show so much so that you want to give back to it, you can. Go to inthekeep.com/support for all the different ways you could buy merch. Our Patreon supporters get free t-shirts and episodes early, so consider doing that if you're into that. Thank you to everybody who does so. Paul, Moose, Dots, Zach, Alexander, Brad, Red Eyes, Anthony, Robert, Jack, Brandy, Fred, Lord Revan, Tones, Igrek, Simon, Amorpher, Mike, Zan, Bridge, Ben, Donkey, Shannon, and the Flam Fam. I love all of you. You're amazing. And I love you out there listening the most. Please continue to do so. And then if you're liking it, make sure you go tell other people. That's the best thing you can do for the show. The best thing you can possibly do is to let other people know how much you enjoy it. Social media, you can grab a t-shirt and wear it down the street. You can climb to the top of a mountain and shout how much you love In the Keep. That would be dope. We appreciate it. I love you. The Drowned God Cathala loves you. Till next time, stay in the Keep.